Hello and welcome to the Go for Ball podcast. As you know, I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mailwig, Sports 25 to Life, and we're talking about hot hitters, cold hitters, trends, who we're making fun of this week, who this week's Chase Utley is going to be, and which guys are actually turning it around. So, once again, the number of qualified catchers dropped. We're now down to 8, and obviously that's a lot due to the platoons. Guys like Russell Martin who don't like to catch knuckleballs, things like that nature, but. Stephen Vogt still leading the way with 319 batting average, leading the way in walks as well by a big margin, 14.6%, and home runs at 10 home runs. It's got 33 RBIs, leads in that too. 428 Woba leads there. I mean, it's really not even close. It's Stephen Vogt and everyone else, as you see on pretty much every podcast we do with Stephen Vogt against a righty especially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's... Even with Buster Posey being pretty hot lately, he hasn't even really come close to catching him in any of these categories. I mean, Posey has 7 home runs. He's up to 303 now. So, I mean, that's about where I expected Posey to be at this point. It took him a while to get to this point, but like you said, he's still really not even close to Vogt in most of these categories.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, right behind them is the guy who's really frustrating. You want to play him, but he's never got a good lineup spot. He usually hits 7th. Sal Perez, 5 homers, 24 RBIs. You hate his walk rate, which is an embarrassing 1.8%. So he's swinging too much, but the strikeout rate not terrible for a guy who's not very patient at the plate, 12.7%. Got a little bit of power, but it's one of those things where it's the Royals lineup, and you hate to get the one-ups because they're just such a good team offense.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of great guys individually, and putting a 7-hole catcher in your lineups every day isn't going to pay off for you very often in the long run.
No, definitely not. Especially, I mean, a 1.8% walk rate is pretty insanely low.
Yeah.
For Perez. I mean, he's hitting 290, but his on-base percentage is 301. Like, I mean, he's a good hitting catcher. He's just not a guy that is going to go in my lineups very often. I mean, 5 home runs on the season's decent. 24 RBI seems a little bit inflated, despite the fact that he's hitting 290. So, I mean, I'd rather look at a guy like Derek Norris, who's hitting 287, but he's been hitting 2-3 in the lineup for the Padres most of the time, and he's just been a little bit more productive consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I feel like he's just a better hitter as well, like you said. So, anytime you get the lineup positioning, similar price points, you're obviously going to take the guy in a better lineup spot. Even when Norris isn't batting second or third, he's batting fifth, which is a much better lineup, or a much better position for RBIs as well. And then everyone's favorite player to play in their Blue Jays stacks and then stand alone when he's hot is Russell Martin, up to 273 on the year, 7 homers, 26 runs is leading all catchers, 23 RBI. I mean, he's not a guy. It's 273. I mean, it's a fine average. He's not a guy that's ever going to bat 300, but that 227 ISO is what you're chasing there with Russell Martin, and second only to Stephen Vogt, and significantly higher than anyone else still.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's tied with Posey at a 136 WRC plus. I mean, he's been pretty solid. 273, not elite, but like we mentioned, he's the opposite of Perez, where he walks a decent amount, almost 10% of the time, a 355 on base percentage. His speed is way better than most catchers, even at his more advanced age. I mean, he's just a more solid play, especially with that lineup around him for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll throw out one more guy, Brian McCann. He's batting just 239, but especially when he's facing a bad righty in Yankee Stadium, he's a guy you got to look at. His price has been really low recently. 6 homers, 29 RBIs, ISO of 188. I mean, his batting average on balls in play is absolutely awful at just 245. So you got to think his batting average will start coming up. And he's a guy you can count on in some tournaments sometimes. As a big bat that actually has upside, unlike some of these other guys.
Yeah, definitely. As far as McCann goes, I mean, a guy that is really hard to play against anyone but a weak righty, really, at this point. I mean, only a 239 average. I mean, he's really hard to play away from Yankee Stadium, too, because that's short porch in right field helps him so much. And, I mean, he's not himself anymore. And he's going to be a decent play sometimes, like we said, against weak righties. But outside of that, nothing special anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. As we move over to first base, not a lot to see here at the top. Same old. Adrian Gonzalez, even though he hasn't been great recently, still carrying the torch there. But right behind him now, catching up quickly now that he's finally hitting the ball at nighttime, Miguel Cabrera, 333 batting average, 11 homers, 32 RBIs, 27 runs scored. Even has a stolen base, so that's one ahead of Adrian Gonzalez there. And I mean, he's having a hell of a season. 257 ISO, right up there with Adrian Gonzalez. And then you look right below him, and there's not a lot of difference between those two guys and Paul Goldschmidt, who's got 12 homers, 38 RBIs, 281 ISO, 329 batting average. I mean, it's those three guys right there, almost identical, and then a slight drop to Anthony Rizzo.
Yeah, and then like after that, it's just a lot of guys that are good. I mean, you're looking at Lucas Duda hitting 305 right now, up to 8 home runs on the year. Eric Hosmer, 303, 7 home runs on the year. Brandon Belt, 299, 5 home runs. Freddie Freeman, 290, 5 home runs. I mean, none of these guys are doing anything special, but they're like rock solid basically every day. And I mean, that's what makes first base tough, is like you can't really punt it, because even the guys that are just like kind of average at first base are really solid with some upside. And if you're not taking one of these guys that's way at the top up here, I mean, you're giving up a lot of upside. And a guy we haven't even mentioned yet that's been as hot or better than anyone in the league right now is Prince Fielder, who's been just incredible lately.
Yeah, Prince Fielder's been absolutely ridiculous recently. I mean, over the past week, I think he's got 5 home runs, close to 20 RBIs. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. And it's another one we've been talking about. I mean, this is the whole reason why we even do this podcast. You see who's struggling, who's not struggling, who's going to start doing better. And I mean, Prince Fielder was the guy who we said all year, he's hitting line drives, he's getting on base, he's just not hitting for power. And then he quickly turned that around and is up to crushing the ball now. So I mean, he's borderline. If that team was any good, he'd be MVP candidate now with the kind of numbers he's
definitely.
But I mean, below him, you got Jose Abreu now. He's finally starting to get it going. Didn't have any home runs in May until a couple days ago. Hit a couple of them. 8 homers, 29 RBIs now. Just a 5.4% walk rate, which you feel like is a little bit concerning. Maybe he's just not being patient at the plate. But that ISO now up over 200 finally, 213. Got to think Jose Abreu is going to continue to get it going. And, you know, you got to expect he's going to be still up near there 30, 35 home runs easily by the end of the season.
Right, exactly. I mean, he's on his way to a really, really nice season.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those guys, and I mean, his price, especially on FanDuel, I mean, it's hard not to play him in cash games every single night right now, because it doesn't even matter the matchup. He hits righties, he hits lefties. He's barely 3K right now, so take advantage of that while you can. It's almost like FanDuel just giving you that gift at first base, like trying to make your decision at first base easy and just go with the obvious option everyone else is going to have. So
yep.
A couple other guys I mentioned around here. Ryan Howard starting to get it going recently, up to 10 homers, 24 RBIs. I mean, we talked about him earlier in the season. He was awful. He couldn't hit lefties. He's never really hit lefties well, but couldn't hit righties either. I mean, he was barely 200. I don't even think it was at 200, actually, but his ISO went up to 263. Certainly helped that the Phillies had a trip to Coors Field, of course, but I think he only hit 1 home run in that series anyway. So, I mean, he's a guy that really goes on a run, and he could finally be considered now again.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that if he's hitting 250, he's in really good shape.
Yep.
I mean, he's never going to be a 290, 300 hitter. But if he's hitting 200, I mean, you're not getting anything out of him, even the days he's hitting home runs sometimes. So when he's up around 250, he's a pretty quality play. Pretty similar to Teixeira at this point, too. Teixeira's got 14 bombs on the season, 35 RBI. He's another guy a lot like McCann he's not going to hit for a great average, but he walks quite a bit, gets on base. Is hitting in the middle of a nice lineup right now and gets helped out by that short porch in Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, and I mean, his ISO's 336, which is just astronomical, and he's walking more than he's striking out, so you like that. But then the really weird thing about him, all these numbers he's putting up, 197 batting average on balls in play, 243 overall average. So, I mean, if that number gets up, I mean, his WOBA's 393 for a guy that's batting just 243. So, I mean, if he can get that batting average up, maybe some of these balls start dropping in. I mean, he's in line for a big season. So, definitely keep your eyes on him. And then as we look at the guys struggling, not a lot of surprise, but your second worst qualified first baseman as far as batting average goes is Mike Napoli. But Mike Napoli also just had a hell of a week. He's up to 8 homers and 22 RBIs. Obviously, he's pretty much the versatile righty specialist. He doesn't really play against lefties very often unless they have to. But his ISO over 200, and, you know, from as bad as he was earlier this season, he's starting to get more at-bats, and he's finally starting to turn around, and he's producing a lot more than David Ortiz is right now, if you ask me.
Yeah, definitely. And, I mean, we're seeing all these power guys towards the bottom here. Chris Davis, another guy, 10 home runs, 26 RBI, but only hitting 216, which is pretty crazy on a 280 batting average on balls in play.
Yeah.
Napoli, you mentioned 208. Chris Carter, another guy that swings for the fences a ton. He's got the home run stroke going again a little bit here. He has 7 home runs now on the year, but only hitting 177 right now is just not going to get the job done.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll throw out one more guy there. Edwin Encarnacion, the guy that I always seem to play on the wrong nights. 12 homers, 32 RBIs. I mean, all these numbers looking great. 29 runs scored, 10.8% walk rate, solid. 236 ISO you love. 222 batting average on balls in play. Got to come up at some point, batting just 225. He was never a guy that was going to bat. I mean, I think he had one season where he batted 300. Was never a big batting average guy, but, you know, you got to think more than 225. That batting average on balls in play going to come up sooner rather than later, you think.
Yeah, same thing with Albert Pujols, only hitting 235 with a 229 batting average on balls in play. I mean, he's still not striking out a ton. I mean, I think Pujols gets the batting average going a little bit. They've both been pretty good with homers, though, 8 and 12 respectively. The 32 RBI for Encarnacion are huge. And, I mean, I think both these guys come around a little bit at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we move over to second base, D. Gordon, we'll just kind of mention him real quickly. I think he has 7 stolen bases this week. He had 12 last week when we talked about him. He's up to 19 now, so he's definitely getting that going. Obviously, no power, doesn't walk much, but he's really still struggling at the plate despite a 435 batting average on balls in play. But the guy at second base you really want. I mean, for a while with us, it was D. Gordon, Jose Altuve every day. Neither one hitting particularly well right now, but the guy who is Jason Kipnis. I mean, he is just destroying the ball. 5 homers, 35 runs scored, 22 RBI, 5 stolen bases, and that's out of the leadoff spot. Striking out 12.8% of the time isn't that bad. Almost a 200 ISO, batting 342 now. And considering the way he started the season, I mean, that just tells you. You look at his recent production, and it's ridiculous. I mean, the guy's getting hits every day, and he's getting extra base hits every day. I think he had a double and a triple. I think he has he has at least one extra base hit in, 7 games in a row? Something like that.
I mean, it's been crazy. I mean, he was pretty close to the cycle the other night. I think he started with a triple, and then hit a double, and then hit a single.
Yeah.
And, I mean, second base has been pretty strong lately. I mean, Pedroia had a 2-home-run game the other night, too. You mentioned Altuve and Gordon were really hot to start the season. I mean, Gordon's obviously still hitting 376, partially because of just how insanely hot he was to start the year. He's up to 19 stolen bases now. He's actually improved his stolen base rate lately, despite not getting on base as much. Altuve, another solid stolen base guy with 15. Not a ton of speed at the rest of the position, though. I mean, we got Brandon Phillips and Ian Kinsler in third in stolen bases with 6. So you're getting a huge advantage when you're using Altuve and Gordon there with the stolen bases.
Yeah, absolutely. And another guy right there that is has really been moving up is Logan Forsythe. He's back. He's up to 298 now. 5 homers, 21 RBI, 17 runs scored. Obviously, the runs scored never going to be elite with that Rays offense not being very good. But you know, he's been bad. He's been getting a nice lineup spot. Evan Longoria is really getting it going. He's got 3 steals as well. 180 ISO is what's really drawn me his way because I mean, you look at the numbers. We talked about 195 for Jason Kipnis. Looks like Logan Forsythe at 180 is the only other guy even close to that other than Brian Dozier, who we'll get to in a couple minutes there.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's pretty crazy how good some of these guys at the top have been. Looking towards the bottom a little bit, I mean, Robinson Cano is still really struggling. He's been a little bit better lately, but a 253 average with only 1 home run is just not what you're looking for from him most of the time. At least his price is way down. He's getting near the minimum on FanDuel. He's getting near the minimum elsewhere, too, outside of really good matchups. So he's going to be a value play probably for a long time this season until he starts hitting some home runs because it's just going to be hard to drive his salary back up unless he starts hitting some.
Yeah.
You mentioned Dozier, another guy that he's having a really nice year despite some batting average struggles. I mean, only 271 average on balls in play, which is kind of crazy for a guy that does have decent speed. You think that probably gets up above 300 around the league average, and he's hitting 270 or so at some point. But 37 runs scored on a Twins team that hasn't really been that good. 9 home runs, 24 RBI, 3 stolen bases. I mean, the guy's been great despite the struggles in average.
Yeah, and especially against lefties. I mean, Dozier, anytime you get a lefty, I mean, he's one of my favorite tournament plays against any lefty, really. And you got to love that. And, I mean, going back to Cano for a second, he's at that point where I don't even want to play him. I mean, I know he's cheap and he's still a good hitter, but without the upside, I mean, now that he is minimum, he makes for a fine cash game play, but he's not even a guy I consider in tournaments anymore because he's got, I mean, his ceiling is garbage. I mean, it's about the same ceiling as I have.
Yeah, it's rough. Really, really rough.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go ahead and move on. Nobody else here that's really striking my interest here at all. we'll move on to shortstop and talk about some of these top guys here. And you will not see Troy Tulowitzki at the top of this lineup because he just continues to not hit the ball. And, I mean, he's 10th, actually, in batting average, down to 266. Seemed like most weeks we were saying, well, at least he's still batting 300, even though he's not hitting for power. Well, at least he's still batting 290. Well, at least he's still, and now he's down to 266.
Yeah.
I mean, he's absolutely unplayable right now for me. There's not a chance you'll see him in any of my lineups. He's not hitting the ball hard. He's not making contact. He's not walking. He's striking out a ton. I mean, there's nothing good to say about Tulowitzki now. Maybe it's mental, whatever it is. What it isn't going to be is part of my lineup because he's just awful right now. Johnny
definitely.
Johnny Peralta is leading the league actually at shortstop in batting average, which is impressive. See him at 305. He's one of many Cardinals that just kind of go under the radar. They're having great seasons.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, shortstop's having an even rougher time at second base this year. I mean, there's really no speed at the position. I think Jose Ramirez is leading the qualified shortstops and steals with 8. Marcus Semion's the guy that is actually a pretty good play at leading in stolen bases with 7. I mean, we've seen guys like Freddie Galvis who are a little bit behind in plate appearances, but he's only got 5 steals. So, like, the stolen bases really aren't there at shortstop. A lot of these guys are struggling. You talked about Tulowitzki already. I mean, he's been playing in some great hitting ballparks like Cincinnati and stuff when they're not in Colorado too, and he's still struggling. Jimmy Rollins was on a decent hit streak this week that just ended, but I mean that got his average up to 203. I mean, I'd love to see him if he was hitting 240 right now. I mean, he'd be in way better shape. Obviously, he's another guy that the batting average on balls in play just hasn't been there either. But we've been expecting it to rise for a while now, and it just hasn't yet. A ton of shortstops struggling. Asdrubal Cabrera, 213, was hitting 3rd for the Rays early in the season, and now he's way down in the batting order. Just not a lot out here. I mean, Zach Cozart's a guy that's been a little bit hot lately, and he's only up to 263, and he's been one of the elite plays lately when he's hitting in a leadoff spot.
Yeah, and I mean, all the usual suspects, like you said. I mean, obviously Tulo, Starlin Castro not having a great year. He is batting 270, but just 3 homers, 24 RBIs. 3.5% walk rate. He's got an awful floor. I guess he's got ceiling, depending on the pitcher. But I mean, like you said, your power bats here outside of Peralta, you've got guys like Brandon Crawford, 6 homers, 31 RBIs. He's had a nice stretch recently. Wilmer Flores up to 7 homers. He's got 21 RBIs, 19 runs too. But I mean, outside of that, really no power. I mean, you got Brad Miller has 5 homers, but I mean, he's 0 for 4 more often than he's even putting the ball in play.
Yeah, he's been tough to play. I mean, I've been playing him a decent amount and which should be good matchups, but hitting 237, striking out a ton. He's not really a base stealer. I mean, he's a really tough guy to play, especially where he hits in the lineup a lot because, I mean, 13 runs, 14 RBI. I mean, he's not giving you a lot outside of those few home runs every now and then.
Yeah, and a guy that had a pretty good season last year who's really struggling this year, Danny Santana. I've been batting 9th most of the time now. Batting 237, but that's on a 327 batting average on balls in play, which is really concerning. And then even worse than that, 1.2% walk rate, 26.4% strikeout rate. Lowest walk rate, highest strikeout rate among qualified hitters there. I don't care if this guy is leading off. I just can't play him. He's just not seeing the ball well at all right now. All right, let's move on over here to third base, where this is one position where there are a lot of guys to talk about. A lot of guys having some hot runs here. And I'll start with the second guy here. Josh Donaldson hit the walk-off homer the other day and then hit the tying home run the next day, and then in the bottom of the 9th, both days. Then they ended up losing the second game, but not because of him. He's up to 13 homers, 41 runs scored, and 35 RBIs. 277 ISO, 314 batting average. This is another one of those ones where I feel like we have to say this more often than we should. If he's playing a lefty that's not an elite lefty, you play him in your cash games and you play him in a ton of tournaments. And, I mean, that's the end of it. It doesn't matter who else is playing. And
yeah, he's been incredible. Yeah. I mean, against
like
lefties,
points, didn't he? The other day?
he's been like automatic against basically any lefty so far this season. It's been crazy, and he's hitting leadoff right now. I think he's hit 2 leadoff home runs in the last week or so. Just been fantastic. But third base has been a fairly strong position, at least at the top. I mean, Mike Moustakas has been rock solid all year. The peripheral numbers aren't great with him, but he's hitting 329 right now. Not striking out a lot. 27 runs scored, hitting second in that lineup, 5 home runs. Matt Carpenter, obviously the rock solid cash game play. We don't even really talk about him that much anymore, just because he's just rock solid every day. I mean, you don't even have to talk about him. He's just going to hit 300. He's got 33 runs, 27 RBI right now. Surprisingly, 8 home runs on the season. I believe he's like 4th at third base. I mean, he's been great.
Yeah, I mean, 254 ISO is what really draws you there. We talked about how good Donaldson's been with power, and then Carpenter right behind him there, so that's impressive. And then right along those same numbers, Nolan Arenado really starting to get it going. He's done a lot more damage against righties and away from home this year, which is strange because before he was the guy who mashed lefties, especially at Coors Field. But I guess he's shown his versatility, putting the ball in play a lot. Just a 12.9% strikeout rate, which isn't bad. 5.1% walk rate you don't love, but that 262 ISO and the 31 RBIs, he's put up the kind of numbers we expected Troy Tulowitzki to have at this point in the season. So he's been a great play. And then Evan Longoria, he's like my favorite tournament play at any position when he's facing a lefty and there's any other third base play that anyone's talking about, because I mean you can get him under 5% owned. I mean he took Casimir deep the other day. He was like 3% owned in a bunch of big tournaments.
Yeah,
love playing him because no one talks about him because he's not having an awesome season, but he's still, I mean, by the end of the year he's gonna have a solid line, and it's not bad as it is right now either.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I played him that same game against Casimir. I think he stole a base in that game too.
Yeah, he had like 10 FanDuel points, 10 or 11.
Yeah, he's got a ton of upside when he actually gets it going. I mean, a guy that walks a decent amount. I mean, 25 runs scored, 23 RBIs, not bad. Pretty solid there. I mean, he's not a guy, like you said, that's going to be talked up a lot, especially because there's guys like Chris Bryant that everyone wants to play right now. Donaldson, obviously. Carpenter's always in play for cash games. Nolan Arenado, who we haven't really talked about yet, has gotten hot over the last few games. 10 home runs, 31 RBI now in the season, hitting 287. He's been really solid too, and a guy that we haven't even mentioned yet because he's only hitting 260. Todd Frazier has 14 bombs on the year and almost 30 runs and RBI.
Yeah, and 6 steals too. So I mean, he's kind of showing it all, especially a Great American. I mean, you get a bad pitcher in there, and it's almost like you just go ahead and lock in Todd Frazier, at least for some tournaments there, because he's got just sick power there. Elsewhere, you got Luis Valbuena is all the way at the bottom, batting just 198, 195 batting average on balls in play, but the weird thing about this guy, he's got 10 home runs on the season and 18 RBIs. I mean, yes, he's batting second, but that tells you the state of affairs for that leadoff spot there sometimes with the Astros. I mean, it's almost like if Altuve gets on base, and Springer's batted leadoff a couple times now, he gets on base, then there's no way Valbuena's hitting that ball. But if there's no one on base, he's crushing home runs. It just makes no sense, but he makes for a great tournament play.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's move over here to outfield, where we've got your obvious top options. We don't need to tell you about Bryce Harper or Mike Trout. They're having monster seasons. Same really goes for Nelson Cruz, batting 341 with 18 homers and 38 RBIs. So, those are your top guys as you go. And then batting average-wise, Anthony goes 338, 465 batting average on balls in play, though. Certainly going to come down, but 8 steals. Getting a guy to top that Tigers order. I love playing him in my cash games when they're facing a weak pitcher.
Yeah, I mean, especially because they're only playing him against righties right now, so he's not having to deal with struggling against lefties. He can just play in the games that he has a nice matchup in. Another guy pretty similar to that right now is Nori Aoki for the Giants. Not doing anything crazy like home run-wise. Really similar numbers to Ghosts. 11 stolen bases is rock solid, though. I think he's second among outfielders. 396 on-base percentage. Just been really, really solid lately. Yeah,
absolutely. He's another guy. And then Michael Brantley, the guy that always seems to be under-owned, 6.3% strikeout rate, 12.6% walk rate, 7 stolen bases, 4 dongs, 28 RBIs. He's the expensive guy no one ever wants to pay for, but you got to get yourself some exposure. And then looking down a couple of these other big names that are finally starting to get it going, Ryan Braun up to 12 homers, 37 RBIs, 264 ISO. Right below him, Andrew McCutchen, not quite to those numbers yet, but starting to get hot. 7 and 27 with 195 ISO. So he's another guy that's really starting to get it going.
Yeah, definitely. Towards the end of this list here for outfielders, I mean, we got the same kind of guys down at the bottom here. Carlos Gonzalez finally had a couple nice games this week, got his average up over 200 finally, but the power hasn't been there. 1 stolen base, the speed hasn't been there. I mean, it's just been rough.
Yeah. And a couple of these Reds outfielders, you got Marlon Byrd now taking the Jay Bruce spot in second to last. Up to 10 homers, 25 RBIs. You got to like 240 ISO, but not hitting. And then Jay Bruce finally hitting the ball, but now not hitting for power. but 7 homers, 20 RBIs, 187 ISO is okay. You're encouraged by the walk rate, 11.9, but strikeout rate 25.4, still not so great.
Billy Hamilton, another one for the Reds that's struggling, only 221. 18 steals on the year gives him some value, but he's been really struggling too. Guys that have picked it up, George Springer's been on a tear lately, up to 230 batting average, 11 stolen bases. I mean, he's looking great lately. We expect him to have a better start to the season. I think he's going to keep it going, though.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that can kind of do it all, so you got to target him, especially even in cash games now because his price is pretty low, especially FanDuel-wise. And then I'll throw out one more guy here. Hanley Ramirez had a great April, not even playable right now because he has just not been good.
Yeah, rough.
All right, thanks for hanging out with us. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe and find all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll see you guys next time.